Hello, great scholars. Once again, it's science learning segment, and you are on to Mr. Alan. I'm glad to be your host. Now, can we get started? Yes, we can. All right. So, I want you to aim for the stars. As young scientists, you should aim for the stars. The sky is your starting point. So says Mr. Alan. All right, let's get down to the business of today. We're going to be studying the topic evolution part 1 and 2. And it promises to be interesting with a lot of scientific facts. So in today's lesson, we're looking at evolution part 1 and 2. It's a merged topic. We're learning to explore the concept of evolution and variation. Now, what comes to mind? You might want to ask, what is evolution? Now, simply put, evolution refers to the gradual changes that occurs structurally, functionally, behaviorally, or physiologically in the body of living things in a particular habitat at a given time. So in a nutshell, it's simply those structural changes we notice, those behavioral changes, and the functional changes we notice when we observe or study some species of animals in the environment. All right, let me move down to the whiff of today. What I'm looking for is your ability to give detailed explanation on the concept of evolution and variation. Now, variation, on the other hand, is gotten from the root word vary. And when we talk about vary, it means the difference that exists between two or more species in a given habitat. Or it could even be among the same species within a given habitat, be it terrestrial or land habitat, be it aquatic or water habitat, or be it arboreal habitat and other sub-habitats or niches we have in the environment. We simply call them environmental niches. There's a smaller version of a bigger environment, or a smaller picture of a bigger habitat. Okay, moving on. Evolution and inheritance is actually an interesting topic in the world of science because over time, man and other animals have metamorphosed from one form to another. Gradual changes has occurred which daily improves on the quality, on the characteristics or traits or features of these plants and animals we find in our environment. Now, plants and animal species are in their millions. We cannot finish studying all of them in just one class, but in this lesson, I have selected a few animal species to talk about and to give you the idea of what we mean by evolution and inheritance, and also the concept of variation that exists among species. Okay, now the fundamentals of evolution are as follows. One of the things you know about evolution is that variation is key because variation has to do with the differences that you can find between two or more species of the same kingdom or the same class or category and so on. Then inheritance has to do with the traits or the characteristics that are passed by parents to their offspring or young ones or progeny from one generation to another. Then selection is another part of evolutionary studies because natural selection occurs in the environment. And Charles Darwin was one of the pioneers of this aspect of evolution that says that nature in itself selects organisms, be it plants and animals, the best of species that can exist or survive in a particular habitat. So he came up with a theory of survival of the fittest. And what that simply means that plants and animals compete for space, they compete for water, they compete for air, they compete for food or nutrients, they compete for warmth or sunlight, and many other natural resources that makes life easier and makes plants and animals to grow and develop from one form to another. Then time. Actually, you can't leave out time from this because time is a passing phase and time is a determinant of different events from one generation to another, from the past to the present and to the future. So time is key in the study of evolution because we study animals from different eras. We have the Triassic era, we have the Jurassic era, we have the Cretaceous era of animal and plants existence. We have the Jurassic period. Those are the periods when birds began to emerge, and so many other eras or periods in the scientific timeline. Then speciation is the last key to look at. For speciation, which simply means the particularization of a species in a given habitat, where you study different species of an organism and you focus on a particular species to know where they belong based on their species, based on their genus in the classification of living things. So this environment simply talk about different forms of variation and or different forms of evolution in the real sense of it. Now we have the different periods. If you can look at this chart, you'll see the periods I just mentioned in the previous session where I talked about Cretaceous period, I talked about the Jurassic period, I talked about the periods that span from the evolution of organisms from the most simplest form to the most complex form, and animals keep evolving on a daily basis. So you can pause this video at any time to study this cycle. Now in science, inheritance has a special meaning. Inheritance is the name for the passing of traits, like I said earlier, or characteristics from parents to their offspring. Another word for offspring is young one, or you can also call them progeny, because traits are transferred from one generation to another. This foal has inherited a very distinctive characteristic from its mother. Can you see what it is? Now look at this picture of a foal and its mother horse. You can see that they look alike from every sense of it. Both color, the patches of white on the forehead, and the fur color, and so many other features. But if you take a closer look, you can talk about the difference in terms of size, in terms of maturity, and so on. So those are the variations you can see in a given species. Now, variation occurs when individuals within a population differ. If you look at this picture, you will see that we have children, sitting and facing backwards. If you take a look at them critically, you see that the skin color varies as they are not of the same color. You have the yellow coloration, you have the black, then you have the white. So we have the white race, the black race, and the yellow race across the globe. So that is a means of variation, and it differentiates one population or country from the other by the looks. Now, if you take a look at this picture, you will discover that we have different eye colors. Most people have the same eye color, some have different eye colors, but a lot of us have similar eye colors, especially the color of the pupil. For some it is black, for some it is brown, and some it is bluish in color. Okay, so this tells us that as we move across different races across the globe, you find variations or things that differs from one another. Even the eyelashes or the eyebrows seem to be different. Some people have a hairy eyebrow, some have a low eyebrow, some have long eyelashes, some people have low eyelashes. So those are variations you find in the environment, and they are as a result of evolutionary processes taking place in the body of living things, and so on. Now if you take a look at this picture I have here, moving on, you see that this are a species of butterflies, but they are of different species, and they have different pattern colors on their body, different designs, different shapes, different wing shape, and many other features that you can find that differentiate them from one another. Now if you take a look at this closely, they are of the same species, they are members of the same family, but they differ in their coloration and shape and size. Now while we're studying this, it helps us to place organisms or categorize them into groups. It helps us in ordering organisms, it helps us in classifying them, and also take us further to study their life cycles, to study the environment or habitat they occupy, to study their feeding method, and to also study what they feed from in the environment, and we also study their importance in the food chain and food web that makes the ecosystem, and all the cycle that makes life to move from one generation to another. All right, so let's look at the day 2 activity. We're looking at evolution part 1 and 2 continuation. We are learning to explore Mary Anning and Mary Leakey and their work. Now, scientists over time has carried out a lot of scientific research or scientific work in the field, and they've been able to come up with a lot of findings. That's why we are studying these concepts today, because of the work of some scientists who have sacrificed their time or painstakingly carry out certain research to become a part of knowledge in the world of science. So in this lesson, we're going to be focusing on how to understand the concept about fossils, and how fossils are formed, what is the importance of studying fossils, and so on. Okay, so what I'm looking for is your ability to recall the main ideas or facts about the work of Mary Anning and Mary Leakey on fossils. Now, these are two giant female scientists. Particularly, they are called paleontologists. Paleontologists are scientists who studies artifacts, or they study fossils and remains of plants and animals that has existed from one generation to another. So they go a lot out in the field, especially in the mines, especially in the desert, in the rainforest, and many other parts of the habitat or environment they can reach to find out about animals that have existed before. So if you look at this picture, this is a picture of Mary Anning, which she was popularly called the fossil girl. Now, what are fossils? Fossils are simply the remains of either plants or animals that has been deposited or cemented over time on the surface of rocks, on sand parts, in deserts, in water bodies, or down beneath the ocean beds, and many other places plants and animals have ever existed. Now, these fossil records ranges from animal shells, animal feathers, animal hooves, things like the skeleton or the bones of these animals, their claws, their beaks, feathers, and many more things that serve as a proof or evidence of the existence of this particular species of organism. Now, moving on, the famous fossilist was born here in a house on the site of Lyme Regis Museum. Now, this is just telling us a brief history of Mary Anning. She lived between the years 1799 to 1847. That's quite a long time ago in the 17th and 18th century. Now, Mary Anning, if you take a look at this picture on the field, just talking about her expedition in going all out to research on fossils. This is the top of a rock. You know, animal bones and bodies are deposited on rock surfaces, animals, feathers, and so on. So she collects them and takes them to the museum for study and write her research findings about it. Now, this picture shows, Mary Anning on the field out with her dog, to carry out a field research in order to give us what we are studying as fossil records today. She was also a major contributor to the aspect of fossil records. Now we have the prehistoric life, where you see animal bodies or bones deposited on the surface of rocks. So this is a typical example of a fossil record. Now with this record, as scientists, we can study the history of this particular fish. We can say, okay, let's get to look at when it has lived from, at what time of the century, between what year, between what time frame, and what were the kind of food it feeds on in its habitat, and what are its contributions to the ecosystem, and many other inquiries you might want to make about this particular animal deposit. Now, this is another good example of a fossil record. As you can see, imprint on a surface of a rock. Most times this happens even in caves, like in the next picture here. It happens in caves. You can see this is a very gigantic mammal that once existed. Over time, the body has decomposed and the bones or skeleton has been cemented or deposited or engrafted in the cave, and it forms part of the structure of the cave or the soil per se. Now, this serves as a historical attraction. It serves as a tourist attraction for us to go study and get to know these animals. Now, we have another picture here showing, of course, this is a picture of a big reptile, a giant reptile that once existed. So with this, you can begin to ask questions. What are its feet? Look at the dentition, look at the teeth arrangement. What are the kind of foods it fed upon in its environment? What are the kind of prey it always go for? And what kind of habitat did it live in? How does it mate? How does it reproduce from one generation to another? And so on. So it helps in studies in schools, in the lab, and even as source of even foreign exchange in museums. People go to watch and look at these things in order to derive knowledge and pleasure. So these are fossil records. Now, this is a picture of Mary Anning. Now we can pause this video and look at this quote at this point to know what it talks about. Okay, next is a question, about Mary Anning's work. So we'll be pausing this video at intervals to ask this question and respond to them appropriately. Okay, let me go straight to Mary Leakey at this point. Mary Leakey is another great paleontologist, and she was the first to discover the human skull after carrying out a field expedition. So we can read the rest of the story on this picture. You can see the first skull. She was able to reconstruct it and gave us the imprint of this face that it looked similarly like this face from the reconstruction of the skeleton. Now you can see the footprints of humans, Homo sapiens that once existed in time past. She also took photos of them, and it has become a thing of study for us. Okay, so we're going to read this together. So let's read together. Okay. All right, I'll move it to the next. Okay. All right, thank you for the wonderful reading. Now, Meriliki is a picture showing the first skull she discovered and the first Homo sapiens that once navigated through the deserts, and she was able to carry out a paleontologic study. Okay, so prehistoric life has to do with life before now, how man looked like before. Remember, in the previous lessons, I've taught you that we have 3 stages in the human development. The Australopithecus stage, where man was a wanderer, a fruit eater, a caveman, and all that. Then he moves to the Homo erectus stage, where his body began to have a disappearance of hairs at some point, disappearance of his tail. He began to make fire to, prepare his meat and food. He started farming and carrying out other life processes. Then he got to the stage where we call the sapiens stage. That's the modern man stage, and that's the stage we've been and we are still moving and counting. So we keep developing and becoming even more intelligent and more sophisticated on a daily basis. Okay, so that takes me to pictures of prehistoric life. These are predictions of how humans look and over time metamorphose through the process of evolution. Okay, so this picture also gives you a guide to that. We can study more on it. Okay, this is Mary Leakey now, in her field expedition when she discovered the first skull and the human footprints. Okay, now, this is going to be like an assignment. We're going to study the life and work of Alfred Russel Wallace. Alfred Russel Wallace is an explorer, he's an evolutionist, and he's a public intellectual. Now, we want to do an assignment on him. You're going to do a research to, give me a 1-page biography or a 1-page scientific composition of the work of Alfred Russel Wallace and his contribution to the knowledge of evolution. So you're going to do that and get it across to me in our next class. Okay, at this point, I want to thank you so much for being attentive all the way. And if you have any question or queries, always feel free to meet me in the science laboratory or on the walkway, and we can talk about it. See you and bye for now. Thank you.